लगेंगे ही, नहीं तो खत्म वैसे नहीं होगा। 2 घंटे का कोर्स है जितना मैंने प्रिपेयर किया है, तो 1 घंटे में खत्म करूंगी, ठीक है? जितना होता है फिर कर लूंगी। ओके। और इंट्रोडक्शन मैं विदाउट पीपीटी स्टार्ट कर रही हूँ और फिर उसके बाद मैं पीपीटी शेयर करती हूँ, ठीक है? ओके। So, a very good afternoon to all of you present here. I, Dr. Krishna Sinhamahapatra, will be taking up the course of literary theory post-World War II, which is there in your net set for English. And I teach with Neswadia College of Commerce. I'm an assistant professor in English there. And I have chosen this topic because usually students find this topic a little difficult. And it is kind of base of our investigation of literature. If we think of studying literature, in-depth study of literature, or if we think of doing research later on in this particular field, literary theory plays a very important role. As a result, we have taken up this module first for our study. Now, I will be sharing my screen for my PPT. Hopefully, it will be visible. Would just like to know if it is visible. Yes. So I guess the PPT is visible now. If not, you can share with me in the chat box. Yes, sir, is it visible? Or any of the students? Yes, thank you so much. So this is what we are going to do. The first unit which we are going to take up is literary theory post-World War II. And what we are going to try and do is try to understand the basic concept of the different aspects of this paper, how we are going to prepare for net set, what will be our focus regarding that, and how at the end of this particular lecture series on this particular course, we are kind of empowered regarding this particular unit. So if we are talking about literary theory, the first thing which comes to our mind or should come to our mind is, what is literature? Though all of us are aware of literature, we are discussing literature, we are preparing for net set in English literature language, it is quite understood that we are kind of conversant with this idea of literature. But even then, somewhere down the line, there might be a question as to what is literature. So if I would like to ask you all that what would be your definition of literature, what would you do, or what would you kind of explain it with? What kind of expression would you give in order to define the term literature? If something is in your mind, you can share that in the chat box. So if it's not there in mind right now, you can kind of figure it out as we go ahead with the lecture, that what is literature? And only when we are quite clear about what is literature, we can come on to the idea of literary theory. What is literary theory? Because literary theory is related to literature. And just like literary theory, we also have another unit on literary criticism, wherein literary theory and literary criticism is similar to some extent, but definitely not the same, which also we are going to kind of find answer of through our lecture series. So the 3 questions which I asked you to kind of answer yourself is, what is literature? Number 2, what is literary theory? And number 3, what is literary criticism? What is, or right now, before we are discussing these topics, what are your ideas regarding these three questions? Because they play a very important role in our understanding of the subject of literary theory post-World War II. So, as I was saying, the very first question which we are going to deal with is, what is literature? So, any work with an unique aesthetic quality, texts that have stood the test of time, works of the imagination or creative writing. So, this is the first option which is given to you. So, would you tell that any work with a kind of unique aesthetic or texts that have stood the test of time, or the works which are the works of imagination or creative writing, are they termed as literature? Next, works with a particular set of qualities, example, plot, character, tone, setting, etc. So if these qualities are there in a piece of work, are you going to term that as literature? Works that emphasize universal themes, that is, that transcend the merely social or political ideas, but they are based on universal themes. So are you going to term a particular work which is based on universal theme as a piece of literature? And again, works that fit the parameters of literary genres. So we know when we are studying in school, in college, we have got these genres, that is poem, we have got essay, we have got short story, we have got novel, we have drama, right? So there are different kinds of genres which are there. So, when we are trying to define literature, is it that we are going to define from this particular parameter? Or we would simply say that anything that is written is kind of termed as literature. So these are a few questions which I would ask you to think on, when we are defining literature. These series of questions which we just discussed, is it that just any one definition enough to describe what is literature? Will that do proper justice to the idea of literature? Yes? So think on it. Now, the basic answer which we can give to these questions can be, kind of got in these two expressions. The first one being that it's the capacity to generalize about phenomena and to develop concepts that form the basis for interpretation and analysis. So something which kind of gives us some idea, gives us some idea about different phenomena and helps us in developing concepts of different things. And these concepts lead on to what? They lead on to the basis for interpretation and analysis. So this is what a literature kind of empowers us and can be kind of termed as literary text. If we see that if we kind of bring together all these points which we have discussed, we get a general idea of literature. And the term literature is actually a modified form of the Latin word litera, which means writing formed with letters. So usually, or rather ideally, literature kind of originated from the idea of writing something with the help of letters. And slowly people started writing, and then we had different genres, and they started kind of clubbing them into different genres and dividing different kinds of writing styles into different genres as well. But the very basic idea of literature is that we are kind of talking about certain phenomena, certain things, which are the basis for interpretation and analysis. And it is in this point that interpretation and analysis, this is the point wherein the idea of literary theory and criticism comes in. So, literature is a body, a written body of ideas, which gives us the scope of analyzing and interpreting, which makes the idea of literature, kind of the fulfillment of the idea of literature kind of comes in. However, in this whole process, the kind of aesthetic quality which is there in literature plays an important role. How it overcomes the idea, the very normal, very basic kind of writing to become a very good piece of literature, how the aesthetics are dealt with, that also plays an important role. With this, we'll move on to the next slide, which is what is literary theory, because this is what we are exactly trying to do in this particular unit, wherein we are studying literary theory post World War II. And we need to understand this very carefully, because usually what happens is that students are they get confused as to what is literary theory, what is literary criticism, how to understand that. It's, sometimes we think that it's a very difficult thing, and we run away from literary theory and literary criticism, which should not be the case. And I'm sure if you are there with me through this lecture series, at least you'll have some understanding of this theory, which will empower you to understand it further as you go ahead with life, right? So the definition is there on the screen. You can kind of read it through this lecture series. At least you'll. So you can just go through the definition, which is there on the screen. So I can see Sharad has written that about the video. I hope Sharad can see it now. If yes, you can just post it, Sharad, that it's visible now. Yes? Yes, Sharad, is it visible? If yes, you can just post it. So I've just posted one query from my channel, Krishna's Canvas, asking you to let me know if it is visible. Expecting that it is visible, I will be carrying on with my lecture. As I told all of you who are online right now with me, that you can just go through the definition which is there before your screen and try and understand what I'm trying to tell through that. So, literary theory is basically the disciplined application of theoretical principles for the purpose of what? Of analyzing, interpreting, and evaluating what? Literary texts. Now, the idea of literary theory is that they are like models. They are like, ideas which are generated in order to give you the power to see literature from a kind of enriched vision. So our power and capacity to read, study, and do research on literature gets boosted when we kind of understand the different literary theories which are there, what is the kind of idea they are trying to represent, how are they asking us to see the different bodies of literature. So usually literary theory, kinds of gives us, we can think of a lens, we can think of a kind of, you can say spectacles, or you can even say that, it's a literary theory is a kind of a glass, which is a colored glass. It might be a pink colored glass, it can be a blue colored glass, it can be a yellow colored glass, which helps us once you see through that glass, your vision, if, for example, you put on a glass which is having a kind of blue color in it, and you look into the world. I'm sure everyone wears goggles, and you know how the picture around you is a little different with the kind of tint which is there in that glass. So literary theory empowers us because we have knowledge of certain models, certain ways of interpreting the literary texts, wherein we can locate certain issues which perhaps we would not have been able to do if we were not aware of the literary theory. We might have been able to do it, but not as systematically as we can do it if we are actually kind of knowledgeable about literary theory. So again, literary theory is a disciplined application of what? Of theoretical principles for the purpose of analyzing, interpreting, and evaluating literary texts. right? So this is what literary theory is about. And as I said, literary theory empowers you to see literature around you in a kind of empowered way, wherein you can locate certain kind of issues and contexts and things which are there in the text, which perhaps would not be possible without literary theory, right? So there is this book which is, which terms as Seeing Like a Feminist. When we are talking about literary theory, it is more like seeing like a literary theorist. That is, you see, you read, you study literature in a completely different way when you are in a class of literary theory. As we were discussing, literary theory is related to literary criticism, though both are not exactly the same. It is literary criticism which originated first, and literary criticism slowly made way for the idea of literary theory. So if we say literary theory as LT, then it is literary criticism which slowly evolved into the idea of literary criticism made way for literary theory. So let us kind of understand what is literary criticism. So literary criticism may have a positive or negative bias and may be a study of individual piece of literature. So it can be an individual piece of literature or an author's body of work. So when we are saying literary criticism, it is actually study of some specific things. For example, we can talk about Plato, we can talk about Aristotle, later on we can talk about Arnold. How, they have been talking about perhaps about poetry in general, they have been talking about particular writers in a specific writers and kind of coming up with some generalized statements regarding their way of writing. But otherwise, literary criticism is not basically a model which is, it's not you cannot differentiate it from a particular piece of literature or that author's body of work. When the literary kind of critics started writing in literary criticism, the practitioners, what did they do is that they kind of assumed, that is, there was an assumption that historical, what is there in history, biographical, that is what is there in about that particular author, and the social information which is gathered about that particular text, that is something which is kind of verified. They viewed that language is transparent, that facts are reliable, history is objective. So the idea was that everything which is before your eyes is ultimate. They took it for granted that whatever they're writing about, seeing or studying is ultimate. However, as literary criticism gradually, moved on to the modern age of criticism, and it resulted in kind of literary theory, starting with new criticism, formalism, and then structuralism. When it evolved into the age of post-structuralism, what happened is that the idea of meaning got deconstructed totally. So post-structuralist theories kind of stated about the ideological appropriation of language by dominant groups and postmodernist disillusionment with object reality both undermine old style criticism. So when we are saying old style criticism, we are referring to the literary criticism and the kind of literary theory studies which had come before post-structuralism and before postmodernism. So what happened is that the post-structuralists, they questioned the whole idea of meaning, and as a result, there started a whole new way of investigation. But in order to reach till post-structuralism, we should have an idea of what happened before that. And that is why we are kind of dealing with this phase. So the different approaches which were there when we are talking about literary criticism, one of the approach was the historical approach, wherein the author's historical moment, that is when that person was writing, is key to understanding a literary text. This is what was believed. Then biographical approach, when we are talking about biographical approach, it is the author's personal experiences which are given central importance while understanding the text. Then is the idea of social realism. So when we are saying social realism, it is the kind of social transparency which is key to understanding that particular text or that particular piece which you are reading on. So these are the different approaches which kind of guided the way of interpretation, that is the historical approach, biographical approach, and social realism. So as we were discussing that when we kind of, the very first part was literary criticism, through which this whole idea of interpreting texts and the idea of the historical, biographical, and social context was there. And literary criticism we will take up in another unit, which we are going to start after we complete literary theory. We are going to concentrate on literary theory in this unit because it's very, very important that we understand the important aspects of each literary theory which is there, so that it helps us to understand the other units which we take up for study further, because our way of looking into literature, studying literature, is definitely going to change as we are kind of guided by the principles of each literary theory which we have for our portion. The first way the literary theory actually started is formalism. And under formalism, usually it's new criticism which started, and then there was the Russian formalism and French formalism which slowly evolved from there. And in each of these, the idea, so dear students, please pay attention to these ideas which we are discussing, because when we are having questions for NET, you can have questions primarily based on the ideas which are there in each literary theory. And also you can have questions based on the facts which are there, and the books names, when they were published, the chronological order of that. And the thing which is very important is that you should be able to understand the concepts, so that it is not that you are completely alien to this idea of literary theory, so that you can actually understand it and answer the questions confidently. So in formalism, what happened is that the idea which came across is that meaning resides in the text. If you remember the last slide, we were saying that the approaches, the ideal, the traditional criticism, what it was doing is that it was talking about the historic, the kind of biography, it was talking about the social context, it was talking about history. But when we came to the formalists, what they said is that nothing but text is important. The other parameters of analysis, that is reader, author, and world, they kind of negated the influence of these parameters. So we have to keep in mind that when we are talking about the formalists, we are talking about the new critics, they are talking about the text. They gave importance to the textual analysis and the importance of text. Now, texts may contain numerous messages, means many messages, but most have a unifying central theme created by the perfect union of all artistic elements which are present inside the text. So we are going to analyze the text and how there is this unifying central theme in that particular text. They believe that texts are what? They are artistic creations. So they believe that texts are created and they are artistic creations. And as a result, the kind of strategy which they asked us to follow is close reading. So close reading is the kind of reading which was suggested, and it is the way in which the formalists were talking about the critical analysis. So the methodology for finding meaning is clear-cut. The tools are unique to literary analysis. So they discussed about different methods which they have kind of taken up in order to do what? In order to do close reading When they are doing close reading, what they are analyzing? They're analyzing the text. And what are they analyzing in the text? They're kind of finding out the artistic elements in that particular text. So they are not paying attention to what? They're not paying attention to the reader's intention, their ideas, their thoughts, nor the author, what the author intended, what the author wanted to say, nor what the world is expecting or what was the world like when the writer was writing. None of these are given importance. What is given importance is the text and text only, because according to them, we have to analyze the value of that particular text based on what is there before us in the form of that text. Now, we are moving on to another literary theory, which is reader response theory, which is again just opposite of what we were discussing in formalism. There we saw that the importance was given to text. However, in reader response theory, what happens is that the idea that text interpretation is not universal, because if I am reading a text and you are reading a text, for example, you go to watch a movie, and after the movie gets over, two of you, for example, two friends go to watch that movie, the movie gets over, and you discuss, or somebody asks you to write a report on that movie, you will see what your friend writes and what you write will never ever be same. It's not humanly possible that two of your interpretation will be same. There will be similar elements, but it cannot be same. There will be different aspects which your friend is going to cover, and there will be different aspects which you are going to cover. Some things may be common, but the entire report, if we read, it will never be the same. And that is what the reader response theory kind of tells us, that the text has many interpretations. It's not possible to have one interpretation. And this many interpretations is the result of what? Is the result of the equation which is shared by the text and the reader. So if I share a poem with you, or if I share a text with you right now in the class, and if I ask you to tell me what you have understood, your equation with that text will define your understanding of that text. So the difference is created because of the difference of interpretation by the readers of that text. And that is what the reader response theory wanted to say, that the text and reader interact to create meaning. Meaning is not constant. That meaning is created through the interaction of the text and reader. Next point is that meaning ultimately resides in the reader's mind. So according to the reader response theory, the reader's mind plays a very important role in defining what can be termed as the meaning of that particular text, or the consensual mind of a community of readers. That is, for example, all of you who are here right now, or whoever is going to kind of watch it later on and is kind of watching at that moment, there will be different interpretations of different people. So it's the kind of the consensual mind, the people who come together to discuss a particular thing. What is their interpretation of that text is what plays important. Next, a text truth is relative. Relative in the sense it is not ultimate, in the sense there will be different interpretations. Readers may reach the same conclusions about a work but approach the task quite differently. So as we were saying, that there might be some similar elements in them, but the approach will be different. The kind of study, the way you are writing down your report, that will be different. The points which you have kind of analyzed or you have understood, that will be different. And that is wherein interpretation of the reader plays an important role. Other major kind of literary theory is structuralism. So meaning resides in the structure of language, not in the art, nor in the reader's mind. So here again we see, so at the beginning we are kind of discussing the major theories which play a very important role in interpretation of texts. And then what we are going to do, we are going to take up each literary theory and discuss the important proponents and the ideas and facts related to those theories. But before that, in the introductory lecture, it is important to have a very basic idea of the different theories which are there existing which we need to read, and how once we are we get an idea of these theories, our way of approaching the literature or approaching texts, they kind of change significantly. That is what we are going to see. So now we move on to structuralism. What happens in structuralism is that the idea which comes across is that meaning resides in the structure of language, not in art nor in reader's mind. So just now we were discussing about reader response theory, and structuralism kind of goes against it, and it is talking about the fact that what is important is structure of language, and meaning is defined by the structure of language in it. So it is a scientific approach to literary analysis. Structure of language as a logical sign system determines meaning. So what is language? Language is a logical sign system. So for structuralists, language emerged as a logical sign system which was determining meaning, right? So structure of language as a logical sign system which determines meaning. And what kind of structure we are talking about? One of the ideas is Lang and Parole. We have syntagmatic, paradigmatic ideas, also the ideas of what are these ideas we'll discuss later on. But when the basic thing is Lang and Parole. What is Lang? Lang is basically the whole body of knowledge regarding that particular idea. For example, the King's English. This is the book on English language. And Parole is a specific example. For example, when you are speaking, that is an example of the way we conduct speech. But if we take up an entire book which is based on language, then that is the Lang, which is actually covering the entire body of knowledge about that particular topic. In case of the King's English, you can take up any book which you have, for example, Wren and Martin, which you have, and it gives us various examples of speech and how it is conducted, and your specific speech which you take up, it becomes the parole of that language. Now, interpret a text or part of a text by taking its language apart. That is, what are the structuralists doing? They are talking about focusing on the language, taking out the language and analyzing the language, and study what? Study derivations, sentence syntax, and how the meaning gets evolved out of the structure of language which is there in that particular text. So when you are going to do a kind of reading based on structuralism, you will have to focus on the language which is there in that particular text, right? Structuralism slowly made way for post-structuralism. If you remember at the very beginning of our slide discussion, when we were talking about how the traditional way of approaching literature was completely dismantled with the introduction of post-structuralism, postmodernism, and deconstruction, which plays a very important role in the idea of post-structuralism. So, Jacques Derrida, he is the most well-known figure of this particular kind of idea of post-structuralism, deconstruction, because he talks about the fact that texts are composed of language, and this language is consisted of unstable sign system. So the sign system is not stable, it is unstable. And that sign system does what? It always defers meaning. So it's very difficult to actually find the meaning because the meaning is always postponed. It is not easy to understand the meaning because the sign system is very, very unstable. And because it is unstable, we are not able to actually understand how to deal with that language. And this is the question which the deconstructionists kind of posed. So the idea that meaning is something which can be easily deciphered, that idea got dismantled completely when we came to the phase of post-structuralism and deconstruction. So they are stating the truth is not constructed. So you cannot construct, or the idea that truth is constructed and it is not given. So that idea of truth is not universally given to anybody. We are actually constructing, that is, we are creating that idea. And as a result, there is no such a correct interpretation. So they are stating that we cannot say that this particular, for example, you read an essay and you write a critical appreciation of that essay. The deconstructionists, they are saying that there cannot be just one correct interpretation. There can be different interpretations. There can be different ways in which we are creating or constructing realities or truth. So look for an apparent meaning, that is the meaning which is just visible by the normal eye, meaning of some aspect of text. Show how the text undermines or deconstructs it. Look again and show how the text undermines the latest interpretation, etc. So, for example, the poems which we have read in school, when we were reading them in school, the meaning which we had for that particular poem was one. And now as literature students, wherein all of you have completed your masters and you're preparing for your NET examination, you again read that particular poem, go back 10 years down your memory lane and read that poem once again, you will see that your approach to reading that particular text has evolved. You can find out different approaches. You can see different other beauties in that text, which perhaps you were not able to see when you were in your school days. So our interpretation evolves. Today, when we are reading something after 10 years, after you have qualified your NET, you're working in a particular college as an assistant professor, and you are teaching in your class, you will see that your interpretation of that text will again change. That is where the interpretation is not universally kind of acknowledged. If we are talking about different theories, if you are kind of interpreting that text through the lens, as I was saying, if you are wearing that lens of that particular theory and you are reading that particular text, your interpretation is going to change again. So look for oppositions, the like good versus evil example. Show how the text undermines first one, then the other, so that the good and evil are exposed as empty concepts. So nothing is universally evil, nothing is universally good. How each thing can be questioned, how our way of reading a particular text can actually bring about a whole new way of looking at that text is something what deconstruction made us think, made us believe, and kind of created this question in people's mind that language is a kind of unstable science system wherein meaning is always differing. That is, it differs. That is, it is postponed. So it's not easy to kind of pin down that this is exactly what the meaning is. As we are dealing with these questions, there comes in this question as to, literature, what is the purpose of analyzing literature? And here, the first thing is that literature is one among many socially constructed texts. So there can be different kinds of texts, your literature, films, music, anything which is there around you can be termed as a text, and it's the way you are interpreting that. So it's the which plays an important role, and the intentional use of imagination. Usually we are using what? Imagination, right? To convey our ideas, which plays an important role. Then history is every bit as subjective as intentionally imaginative texts. So history, if we talk about history in general, the texts of history, they are also not completely based on facts. There will be some element of what the writer is wanting to tell us in it. Purpose of analyzing literature is to locate the hidden social messages, especially those that promote oppression. And now the theories which we are going to discuss, they are going to be based on this idea of kind of locating the hidden social messages and identifying how there is a promotion of the idea is promoted, that the promotion, the idea of oppression. What is oppression and how literature kind of propagates that, or it gives projects that, or is critiquing that. What exactly it is doing, we can kind of read about that. Then the idea that texts have no final interpretation, and hence analyzing literature in a very seasoned way is important. Then language, though socially constructed, is stable enough to be useful. So language is socially constructed, but it can be useful if we are using it very scientifically and properly. We have to find what the small, intriguing, or odd piece of text and interpret it by comparing it with contemporary science systems like magazines, newspapers. And what we are doing is that we are interpreting the body of text through our understanding of the society in which we are currently, through reading of these newspapers, laws, and magazines, which help us to analyze literature in a better and empowered way. So as I was saying, depending on the context, the post-colonialism is again one important theory, which talks about the fact that meaning resides in text, history, and ideology. So the text which is there before you, the history in which that particular text was written, ideology is the kind of belief system which has been used in that particular text. So literature is a political tool. Those in power decide what is art. And through post-colonialism, the idea of discourse, the idea of counter-discourse, the fact that anybody, whoever is speaking, is not included in the canon of literature. It is people in power who design and who publish their works, and their works get included in the canon of literature, what we read. So literature as a political tool. So post-colonialists study literature and see literature as how it is a political tool for the propagation of the ideas of the people who are in power and who decide what is art and what is not art. So nowadays you will see that writing back to the established systems of the society is in the kind of more common, because for a long time it is the people in power who have been using literature as a tool. It is still being used, but questions are raised and counter discourses are also getting eminence. The truth is relative. So post-colonialists try to identify the fact that whatever is looking like truth before you is, or perhaps not the complete truth. There can be layers of truth. Just the way we talk about an iceberg, if we see an iceberg, the part of iceberg which is above water, we can see that through our kind of naked eyes. We don't see the part of iceberg which is below the water, right? The iceberg which floats on water. So the idea of post-colonialism is that they are saying that what you are seeing as truth in a text might not be the entire truth. There might be certain elements which are hidden. And as a result, the post-colonialist approach is to kind of identify those hidden facts which are not seen apparently through our normal eyes. So study the author's and reader's life and times, look at tensions between conflicting cultures. So the cultures are also not same everywhere. There is conflict in there. Explore the double consciousness. So the idea of double consciousness comes in, and double consciousness of colonized and post-colonial writers. Observe how colonizers refashion the colonized. So colonizer and colonized, this concept should be very clear when we are talking about post-colonialism. That is the people who conquers a piece of land, and how the people who are conquering, they have the power, and the people who are conquered, who are colonized, they are not given power. And as a result, when they are kind of writing back or identifying the truth which has been presented by the colonizers, they see that there is need to refashion that or to re-examine that. So double consciousness is the dual self-perception experienced by subordinated or colonized groups in an oppressive society. So the term and the idea was first used by W.E.B. Du Bois in his autoethnographic work, The Souls of Black Folk, in 1903. And he talks about the double consciousness, which he was also a part of. So you know, the kind of being colonized, the layers of colonization, and how the identity is subjugated, that plays an important role in post-colonialism. Next, we come to Marxism. So Marxism is again, which talks about what the workers look like. How do they look like to a capitalist? So the capitalist who is kind of controlling the system of that particular power unit, how is he looking at the workers? What are his views regarding that? That is focused. It speaks about the fact that meaning resides in text, it resides in history and the ideology. So messages, what is the message which they focus on? Oppression and class conflict. So how oppression is a part of the reality, and how class conflict plays an important role. So all these things are identified through a Marxist reading of a text. So they identify text as what? As commodities and not timeless works of art. When we are talking about the idea of commodities, or the idea of commodities, what happens is that the texts are like kind of, the idea of aesthetic beauty, works of art, that is put aside. What is given importance is that texts are like commodities. Now, truths are socially constructed. So they do not believe the truth which is just given for open eyes. They are saying that truths are socially constructed, and it's not just one truth, there are different truths. They look for evidence of oppressive ideologies of the dominant social group, and look for uses and abuses of power. So it is about the power, the bourgeois and the proletariat, the ones who are in power, how they are treating the people who are not in power, and how is the social structure designed, which kind of helps this kind of system to continue, and how that can be dismantled. So all these different questions comes in. So this is what Marxism talks about. Then we come to the idea of feminism and LGBTQ theory. Here again, the idea that meaning is socially constructed comes in, and its meaning, the idea of discourse, how what is accepted as truth is kind of, anything and everything, whichever we come and tell will not be accepted as truth. It will not get importance. It will not get voice. So there are different power politics which is there in the society around us, which plays an important role in accepting what is, as what is truth. So meaning is not a kind of absolute thing. It is kind of socially constructed, and texts have more than one interpretation. Texts are commodities, which we discussed. Truth is relative, highly dependent on arbitrary categories of difference. Example, sex and gender. So when we are talking about feminism, we are talking about LGBTQ theory, the different aspects of being a lesbian, being a queer, and being a gay. So what exactly, the idea of gender is. So we are going to discuss all these things when we study feminism and each theory in details. This is just an idea that these theories are actually dealing with these ideas, so that you can create that structure in your mind. And when we take up one theory after another, it doesn't become very difficult for you to understand. And you can have that idea in your mind that slowly there has been a development in the idea of theory, and different theories have come up. And these theories are giving us certain tools. They are giving us certain ways of looking at the society. They are, the way we are kind of looking at literature that is changing. So in case of feminism and LGBTQ theory, we are going to talk about sex and gender and how they play an important role, and the idea that meaning is socially constructed. So look for systems of containment, that is something which kind of reserves you. For example, the repression, oppression, suppression, subversion, that is something getting subverted, rebellion in texts by women, or the texts which have been written by male authors about women, how they are represented, what are the equations which are demonstrated. Study women's unique ways of understanding and writing about human condition, that is the way a woman writes a text, or the way a woman represents a woman, and how a man, when he is writing that text, how the gender is represented. We are going to discuss about this idea. And the feminism is, again, the idea is developing. There are different waves of feminism: first wave, second wave, third wave, fourth wave, and we are talking about fifth wave also. And then when we are talking about third world feminism, how the idea of feminisms is important. There are different feminisms coming across from different parts of the world, and the third world countries. And even if we talk about the Indian context, the idea of Dalit feminism, what is it? And the idea of being subjugated and different layers of oppression in the idea of feminism. So all these things are to be discussed when we are talking about feminism, how it originated, who were the proponents, and what is the issue of LGBTQ theory, and how it's important to talk about gender when we are discussing literary theory. So what we did through all these studies is that we kind of discussed the important literary theories which have created a landmark in the study of literary theory. Now, as I was discussing that, when we are preparing for our NET examination, SET examination, or any competitive examination, our way of study has to be, a little different, and that is what we are going to do over here. So it's not only, a very basic understanding of it, but an in-depth understanding of each theory is important. And it's not only that, what we are studying in this literature, because we have got a very limited time in which we are going to discuss these theories. It's not possible that everything will be covered, but what we are going to do is we are going to see how we are going to study each literary theory. And for that, the case in point which we are going to read at first is new criticism. And when we are discussing new criticism in the lecture, you have to try and see how we are going about with that literary theory. It will be a case study as to how you are going to go about reading the other literary theories as well. So these are the literary theories which we are going to discuss in details. That is new criticism, formalism, structuralism, post-structuralism and deconstruction, postmodernism, psychoanalytic criticism, archetypal literary theory, reader response theory, feminism, Marxist criticism, new historicism, queer theory and LGBTQ, as we were just discussing, eco-criticism, and post-colonial theory. So these theories on an average covers the important theories which are there, and our understanding regarding each theory is important kind of critics of that theorists of that particular group. What are the different important terms which are there in those groups? What are the important kind of concepts which are there? And the chronological, that is timeline based study of the works of different writers and authors are important in order to understand these theories. And as I said before, these theories came into place, what was there around was literary criticism. So it is literary criticism which slowly evolved into the idea of literary theory. Literary criticism, as we have already said, we will take up after literary theory. And in literary criticism, it started with the Greek literary theory, the critics. It's Plato, Aristotle, and then it went on through the different ages from Victorian to Romantic age and modern, Romantic, Victorian, modern. So all these ages, it kind of evolved into. And eventually we got the formation of these literary theories into different ages, right? New criticism tomorrow, since we don't have much time. We will kind of conclude the lecture after in 8 minutes. But till that time, what we are going to do is that we are going to discuss the first theory, which is new criticism. New criticism dominated American literary criticism in the middle decades of the 20th century. So where did new criticism kind of originate? It originated in America. It's American literary criticism, and it dominated in the middle decades of the 20th century. The founder of new criticism school was American scholar John Crow Ransom. Now, this book is very important because he published a book titled The New Criticism, in which he coins the term ontological critics. What does that refer to? It refers to the reader as one who recognizes a poem, a literary work, as a concrete entity. So, literature as a concrete entity. A poem can be analyzed to discover its true meaning, independent of its author's intentions or a reader's emotional responses. So you can remember what we discussed in formalism, wherein we were discussing about the fact that we have to focus on the text, and a poem, they actually, the new critics mainly focused on the analysis of poem, which kind of be analyzed to discover its true meaning, independent, that is not being dependent on what, on the author's intentions, that is what the author wanted to say, or a reader's emotional responses. So the parameters of the author and the reader are not given importance. What is given importance is the text which is there before us, before our eyes. So this is what the new critics wanted to do. So, new criticism, what is it? If we try and understand it in a nutshell, the new criticism is a post-World War I school of Anglo-American literary critical theory that insisted on certain things. What are the certain things? Number one is the idea that it focused on the intrinsic value of a work of art. That is, what is the value of that particular art if we are studying the art and understanding the heart of that particular text. It focused on what? The focused attention on the individual work alone as an independent unit of meaning. So that particular individual work alone as an independent unit of meaning, wherein it is not dependent on any other parameters. It is the text, and we are going to read the text. It focused on the critical practice of bringing historical or biographical data to bear on the interpretation of a work. So it was opposed, that is, it didn't want what? The critical practice of bringing historical or biographical data to bear on the interpretation of a work. So the parameters of what is, if you remember the very first way where we started the different approaches, the historical approach and the biographical approach is not given any importance. What is given importance? The importance is what? The focused attention on the individual work, that is given importance. So this is the main idea of new criticism, which is that we are talking about the intrinsic value of a work of art. We are focusing on the attention given to the individual work alone as an independent unit of meaning, and we are not giving any importance to the historical or biographical data while analyzing the particular text. Now we are going to discuss about the technique which is involved in new criticism. So, the technique which is involved is that the primary technique employed in new critical approach is close analytical reading of the text. And this is as old as Aristotle's Poetics. So this is the start of the idea of literary criticism. So if we talk about the very start of literary criticism, from then the idea of close analytical reading of the text. However, they introduced certain refinements into this method. And what is that? The new critics believe that the structure and meaning of the text were intimately connected. That is, the structure and the meaning is intimately connected and should not be analyzed separately. So what are the two things which needs to be analyzed together? It is the structure and the meaning of the text. Now, in order to bring the focus of literary studies back to the analysis of the text, they aim to exclude the reader's response. So they excluded what? They excluded the reader's response, the author's intention, what the author wanted to intend. So there are certain fallacies like intentional fallacies, affective fallacy, which they have kind of come up with. And they stated that these things should not affect you when you're analyzing a piece of work. Historical and cultural context. So what is the historical context? What is the cultural context? And the moralistic bias for their analysis. So they were against all these things, anything which is not included in the text. So they were talking about close analysis of the text and the fact that structure and meaning has to be studied together, and you have to keep away what? You have to keep away the intention of the author, intention of the idea of the reader, historical and cultural biases, the social context. So these goals were articulated in Ransom's Criticism Inc. and Alan Tett's Miss Emily and the Bibliographers. There are certain proponents of new criticism, and we are kind of going to deal with that in details in our tomorrow's lecture. So don't forget to be there in tomorrow's lecture so that you can understand the critics carefully and understand their importance. So now you can see on the slide that the early seminal works in the tradition were those of the English critics, that is I.A. Richards, his idea of practical criticism, William Emerson, his idea of 7 types of ambiguity, English poet, all of you must have heard his name and read his poems. T.S. Eliot also made contributions with his critical essays, Tradition and the Individual Talent, and Hamlet and his Problems. So the movement did not have a name. However, until the appearance of John Crow Ransom's book, The New Criticism, which we just discussed, a work that loosely organized the principles of this basically linguistic approach to literature, there were other figures associated with this, kind of theory as well, which is Clayton Brooks, R.P. Blackmore, Robert Penn Warren, and W.K. Wimsatt. So we are going to discuss about these writers. We are going to discuss about these topics in details further in tomorrow's lecture. So stay tuned, stay with me, and kind of enjoy this journey which we have embarked on today. With these words, I would kind of call it a day for today and kind of go through the points which we have discussed today and be there tomorrow for the session as and when it is put up on the group. So any questions, anything you can come up with, write down in the chat box. If not, then thank you so much for being there with me. See you all tomorrow. Have a great day.
you